welcome back to Drafted, where we talk all things SuperCoach Draft on the official SuperCoach podcast feed. We're talking defender ranks today, and to help do so, we have Lekdog back with us yet again. How you going, Lekdog?
I'm well, mate. Always a pleasure, and it's a very special guest today.
Absolutely, yeah. We've got rid of Patch for this one to bring in the man, the myth, the legend of the draft community, a man who's completely sold out and come on the official SuperCoach podcast, Stevie Fizz from the Draft Doctors. Welcome, Stevie.
Yeah, no, g'day, Darcy. Thanks for having me. The check cleared, so it's all good, mate. It's all good.
Thanks very much for jumping on, Stevie. We know you love your SuperCoach, so going to go through Lekdog's ranks on this list, on this podcast today, but you have let us know in the private group chat, just to warn you, Lekdog, before we do jump into your ranks. Steve has said that he's aiming to tear them to shreds. That is a direct quote, tear them to shreds. Stevie, what's this all about?
Well, he's a Carlton man. You got to. They usually have big pre-seasons, so you got to just take him down a peg, just humble them a fraction. So, no, Lek's a good man. I'm sure he's all over it.
Yeah, and honestly, I've got another article coming out close to the season where I re-rank him, so I'll probably just take all of Steve's advice and update him based on that. So it's basically free content for me. It's win-win.
Perfect. Well, draft is actually open now, so you can go make your, league, get ready for draft day. Obviously, you don't necessarily want to be drafting now. It's a pretty distance off still. We want to see some practice matches. We want to see some certain games and performances and roles from our players before drafting. So, but you can jump in now and set up those leagues. And we're actually doing right now a bit of a mock draft to get you ready for that season. We'll have Lekdog, I think we'll be doing some content on that as well coming up. But I just wanted to touch base with you guys. We're in about the end of just looking now, actually, I think it's your pick, Steve, now. But we're at the end of the fourth round, heading into the fifth. Lekdog, have you noticed anything yet? It's still pretty early in the draft. It's a 12-team league, for those wondering. We've got a bunch of content creators jumping on board to help us out with this one. But anything you've noticed off the top in the early rounds, Lekdog?
No, nothing really going strangely. Probably more rucks gone at this stage than I thought there would. So we had Cherry and Gorn go early in the first round, and then you kicked it off actually in round two, a bit of a run with Tom DeConnie in round two.
Yeah, it was a bit early for the big fella, but look, I'm high on TDK. I wanted to get the ruck run going nice and early. But Steve, have you got any thoughts on just the early part of the mock draft at the moment? It's as I said, it's very early. It's only heading into the fifth at the moment.
All right, yeah, I'd probably echo Lek's thoughts. One thing you see as a rule in the expert quote-unquote drafts is that people will sit back on the rucks aside from the early guys. So probably to see that big run happen when there's maybe a few question marks. I know I took Gorn myself, but beyond that, I maybe a little bit surprised seeing how deep it bats and maybe some questions being asked of guys like Darcy and Marshall.
Yeah, well, that's a nice little teaser for the upcoming, I don't know what sort of content we're going to do. Might be an article, might be a little bit of a pod. We'll wait and see for that, but keep an eye out for that mock draft coming your way soon. Let's get into our defender ranks. The way the show's been working, we've been going through Lekdog's rankings and then talking about them as we go. We are going to go through the top 30 defender rankings for Lekdog, and we'll kick it off with your ranks 1 to 10 in the defenders.
Yeah, well, we'll run through them first and then we can dive into a bit of detail. So in tier 1 for me, I've got 3 guys, Harry Sheasel, Jack Sinclair and Luke Ryan. Tier 2 is Jordan Clark and Lockie Whitfield. That's your top 5. And then your remaining 5, I've got Sam Flanders sitting in tier 3 on his own, and we'll talk about him, I'm sure. Tier 4 is Wanganeen Malera, Max Holmes, Nick Martin and Dan Houston. And if I'm not mistaken, that's 10. That's 10. There you go. That's your top 10.
Correct. Well, I mean, I've got a few players I want to talk about, but to hand it over to the man who wants to tear them to shreds, I better get it over to Stevie Fizz and see if you've got any specific players you want to talk about in this top 10.
It's probably Luke Ryan is the player who I'm down on this season, as opposed, probably if you're basing your ranks sort of around last year's averages, I sort of can't see that first half especially repeat for Ryan. I think his, disposals will come down. He's still obviously a great interceptor and still worthy of a top 10 pick. I think I have him at D6, so I still like him. But for me, he's actually just not that top tier defender. I'm not projecting him that way heading into this season. So he's probably a standout for me that I might not be as hot on.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I mean, just to put some numbers to it, I know people have talked about it. You talked about the hot start, a bit of a slow finish, 130 average from rounds 1 to 12, and then 102 SuperCoach average from rounds 13 to 24. But Lekdog, just talk us through this third ranking for Luke Ryan.
Yeah, I know it was a season of two halves last year. I do think there will be a regression there. I think we're probably going to expect something closer to his 2023 numbers, which was about 110 from memory, which is still pretty decent for SuperCoach. Yeah, there'll be a bit of a drop-off, but I also know that Fantasy Freako's been tweeting about him, and that is always a good sign pre-season. So he talked about averaging 126 in the games where they played quick and 121 in the games where they played slow, and that's a sample size of 10 games. It's not massive, but I think he's still going to get 110 plus. It might not be 116, and I think he's a relatively safe option. Whereas, just talking about the draft we were doing today, I took him with my first or second pick maybe. I was actually tempted to take his teammate, who I've got just below him at fourth, Jordan Clark, ahead of him, because I'm pretty high on Jordan Clark, but there was nothing to back that up. So, as in choosing Ryan over Clark. So for me, Ryan's still a top tier dude. Sinclair, I think, is going to be awesome. I know you're not on him, Dos, and I know that there's some injury concerns over him since I made these rankings, but I don't think Heaps is going to split Sheasel, Sinclair, and Ryan come the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm not as hot on him, but I still think, again, very worthy of a top 10 pick, Sinclair. I'm not off that at all, like the way he finished last season. And, I mean, the more injuries that mount as well at St Kilda, the more high I'm getting on him, because he's probably going to have plenty of the Sharon back there as well, or wherever he plays. One player I do want to touch on, Stevie Fizz, your thoughts on Sam Flanders at 6 in the rankings after his massive year last year, averaging close to 120 SuperCoach points?
Yeah, I've got him at 4 at the minute, and I'm not... the back thing, he probably needs an adjustment. He probably needs an adjustment to come down a few spots. So I don't mind where Lek has him. Love the player, obviously, but yeah, he should be okay, all right? He should be fine playing through the midfield for Gold Coast.
I did actually have him at 6 before the injury news, so just to fan those flames. But for me, it was just a question mark on where exactly. I think he's going to score well. I don't think he's going to score 120 points a game. I don't know the Suns in the same way you do, mate. I don't know where he plays, and that's enough for me to drop him down the ranks a couple of pegs.
Fair enough. Was there any other players you wanted to touch on, Steve, before we move to the next sort of 10 of ranks?
Well, I've actually got Houston at D3, so he's a player I'm far more comfortable selecting than Lek. You probably get him at a better value than that. I think he's got a lot of room for improvement at Collingwood. He never had the kick-in share at Port Adelaide. There should be plenty of intercepts for him at Collingwood. So I think he's got a lot of upside. He's someone who I could take as a tier 1 defender who you don't necessarily have to draft there. Although he went pretty early in the mock.
He did go very early in the mock. I won't bore you with all the details, but I do track SuperCoach averages by position of players when they move clubs over the years, and generally defenders do, particularly in the Dan Houston role, do see an uptick especially in that first year that they move across. So I think there's room for improvement for him there, but he's just someone I've never really gelled with, and there's a bit of bias in this where he falls into this category where with Malera, Holmes, and Martin, who I'm probably emphasising their upside based on their age and experience over his upside on roll. And I mean, flip a coin. I know I'm lower on Houston than a lot of people are out there.
All right, I think we can move on to the next batch of players, your ranks 11 through to 20.
All right, let's pull it up. 11 through 20. Okay, so tier 5, we have my boy Bailey Dale and Jaden Short. Tier 6, these are the old blokes. Dane Zorko, Tom Stewart, James Sicily, Jeremy McGovern. We're going to call that the old bloke tier. Then we've got in tier 7, Nick Blakey, Colby McKercher, Matty Roberts, and rounding out the top 20 is, and there's plenty of guys in tier 8 here, but the 20th player on my list is Mitch Hinge, who is just one of my favourite blokes to draft in SuperCoach.
I want to specifically talk about a guy who finished last year incredibly hot, and then I'll get your takes, Stevie Fizz. But I really like Matt Roberts a fair bit higher than 19 this year. Came home firing last year, averaging over 100 towards the back half of the season. He's got a ridiculously high kicking percentage. I think the Phantom mentioned it on our podcast about Classic yesterday that we recorded, and it was saying like 84% kicking efficiency, and it was one of the highest in the league for people over 12 kicks a game. So he's a guy that Sydney, I think, will rely on to distribute the ball out of the back half, and I've kind of got him, I think I've got him all the way up at 10 in my recent ranking. So I'm super high on Matty Roberts this year. But Stevie Fizz, have you got any notable players there that you'd like to speak through, and your thoughts on Matt Roberts as well?
I mean, Matt Roberts I find tricky because it's not a huge sample size.
New coach too.
I will say James Sicily, I can't have a bar of it, man. I can't have it. I got him at D30.
Oh, wow.
I just don't want him. Well, I mean, you think about it like this. Is he going to play forward? I tend to, over the years, I've tended to, if I'm down on someone, I don't move them down 5 spots. Like Sicily, I'll move them down a dozen spots. So I can't have it with the uncertainty.
So Sicily, I have what's that? What do I have him at? 15th for defenders, but I actually have him a lot lower in my overall rankings. Just the way it panned out, and he dropped like 70 or 80 spots year on year for me in the rankings. So I'm also concerned by him, particularly with that questionable tall forward line at Hawthorn. It's not specifically the fear that he'll go forward for me, but there is uncertainty there, and they've added in, 2 big elements into that back line. So I appreciate the fear, and having him 30th is probably makes sense. Just for me, I'm like, if I'm sitting there and you're forcing me to pick someone during the live draft, and I've got Sicily or my boy who I love, Mitch Hinge, I'm probably just going to take Sicily ahead just because of, I don't know, he's going to play theoretically every game unless he starts punching people again. So, yeah, he is a difficult player too. I don't want him on my team. I'm going to avoid drafting him if I can.
There's a couple of fossils in the list, as you did mention, Lek, that you've been, potentially harsh on if you look at just their average of last year, but you're really kind of, factoring in the age. You've mentioned in like a couple of previous podcasts that you certainly give a bigger hit to players with an injury history as well. So these guys certainly would tick that box as well. But Jeremy McGovern and Dane Zorko, if you just looked at their average from last year, would be a lot higher up the list. But Stevie, are you as harsh on players that, have had standout seasons like they did, played probably irregularly high games for their traditional histories? Are you sort of dropping them as far as, Jeremy McGovern at 16 and Dane Zorko at 13? Man,
I love Zorko. Like, I find the injury narrative around Zorko kind of puzzling. He's basically played 20 plus games every year. So I don't know, man. If you're playing 20 games, I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah. I've got him far higher than Lek. I understand dropping guys like that, and Jeremy McGovern's I've got him at 24, and it's not because he's old. It's just because he spends more time in the medical tent than Alan Alda. There's an old man reference for you people. It's fair.
Yeah, like Zork, he had 23 last year, he had 17, 19, 21. Like, they're acceptable game amounts. It's when those games happen. And if I'm given the choice between someone who, like, I just don't want that injury to happen in the game where I need to win to make finals or that first week of finals or whatever. So I bumped those guys down. McGovern's the same. Like, yeah, had a very good year, but how often does he do it? Well, he doesn't do it. So it's this is a Bill Simmons line, but I like my footy players to play footy, and Jeremy McGovern doesn't do that. Tom Stewart, I'll just touch on. His isn't an age thing. His is more of a role thing. We saw him move sort of from back line to the wing to sort of inside mid time last year, and I carried him in Classic for most of last year, and he was fine towards the end of the year, but there was enough uncertainty, and they've acquired enough talent that I'm just happy to push him down a little bit.
Just want to talk about one more players that the Hat Bros, as you like to call them, Stevie Fizz, are getting around a bit. Jaden Short up at 12, so the Classic community is getting quite a bit around Jaden Short as a player that, you know, could return to some great heights, given I think his average was only in the 80s, low 80s last year. He's done 90 plus in the past, and the Tigers, obviously, it's, you know, presumably going to be in their backline quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm not as hot on Short. I've got him at 17, and I'll probably end up moving him down. I'm just not sure he's very good at this point. Like, I know that's harsh. Like, he's obviously a good player, but I don't know if maybe the best is past him, and I don't really want many parts of that Richmond team, to be perfectly fair.
Absolutely fair.
Can we talk about Max Holmes? Because I know people like Max Holmes, and I love the player, but there's a guy, you know, you talk about Tom Stewart getting split around. Like, if Max Holmes is playing, like, let's say 40% inside midfield and then a lot of the time on the wing, I'm a little bit cagey about him.
Yeah, look, and I think that's fair enough. For me, I'm sort of hoping that they transition him back into, and again, you don't want to hope when you're drafting, but transition him behind the ball a bit more. I didn't love, from a SuperCoach perspective, that when he was on the wing and stuff. But the other thing you have to understand, Fizz, is that if I drafted someone in a dynasty league, they get bumped up the rankings. And now, admittedly, I did trade Max Holmes to try and go for a back-to-back flag in my main dynasty league, but I did draft him, so I did call it. And that, as a result, he does get a bump.
I think he's really a really good outside player, which is the problem, right?
I mean, that is a problem. What I want to see is how they use like a Bailey Smith, because and I don't know if we'll get to the forwards. I don't actually think Bailey Smith is that good in terms of SuperCoach or football, but I understand that everyone else does. So I'm interested to see how that whole side sort of shakes up, and I'm just hoping that there's enough kind of outside players there that they just shove Holmes behind the ball and trust that he can kick it to a teammate.
I'm just looking at games at which he attended, like if he's going to be more of an inside mid, the games he attended 50% plus centre bounces, and he averaged over 100 in those. It's 9 games, like it's not a massive sample last year, but I don't know, maybe that's just what people are going off. If he's going to play a bit more inside mid, even if he plays a defender, I don't know. I don't dislike the pick. I feel like talk about injury prone. I think this guy could certainly tick that box. 25 games last year, but still managed to do a hamstring right at the end of the season. So always seems to have those hamstring concerns with the high explosive game that he sort of plays. Hopefully he can get his body right. Let's talk about 21 to 30, Lek.
All right, well, this is where you get into a bit of fun. So I've got Trent Rivers in at 21. He's a tier 8 guy alongside John Noble and Carl Amon and Mitch Hinge, who was in the top 20. Callum Mills is low. I know he's going to be low compared to what most people think. At tier 9, I've got Callum Mills, Harry Himmelberg, Daniel Rioli, Adam Sard, Andrew McGrath, and Callum Wilkie. And 30th is Kadeen Coleman, who I think might actually be injured at the moment, so that doesn't bode necessarily very well.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, you did these ranks before the last couple of weeks, and that's a long time in pre-season. Sometimes, Kitty, you'd imagine you would bump that down. He's not going to be coming back until, a few rounds into the season at the very earliest, from what we've heard.
Bump up Rory Atkins instead then. Chuck him up a few spots.
Let's talk Callum Mills. Stevie Fizz, what are your thoughts on him this season?
D9 for me. D9. Huge, and I've seen him higher, man. I've seen him higher. So,
yep. I'm pretty high. I think I've got 13. I'm just sort of on the edge of. I might even bring him higher if I see even more midfield stuff, and also seeing Stevie's higher on him, I'll also bump him up. As we've mentioned, the draft guru here. Walk us through why you're not high on him, Lek. 24th overall in your ranks, in defender ranks.
It's the play football factor. It's the new coach factor. It's the Angus Sheldrick hype factor. I mean, if Sheldrick's in, you can't have Mills in there as well. But he is a leader. He is going to want to prove himself after. What was he doing? Wrestling preseason and snapped his arm last year. There's a lot of reasons for him to prove his output, and he's definitely one that, you look at this list, he's going to get a bump, but my initial reaction to him was just, I just didn't trust him, essentially.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's going to be interesting where he goes, and Steve, as you said, I think people have got him high. It's going to be fascinating where Callum Mills goes in draft. I think, we talked about a guy like Clayton Oliver last year. We're expecting a big bounce back, but his draft range could be wildly different in each draft. I'd imagine the same with Callum Mills, just given his injury history, given his role, given his all these different things. But the defender status does, it's always tempting, and if you've got him D9, you'd be happy drafting him early. I want to talk about Trent Rivers as well, 21. What's your thoughts on him, Steve? Some talk he's going to move into more of a midfield role. He's got defender mid status, 21. Where are you sitting on Trent Rivers?
I actually have him in the exact same spot, believe it or not. So I don't mind Rivers. Obviously, it's a hard midfield to maybe get points in. So I think 20. I wouldn't want him is any higher than my D3. So I'd be... Yeah, he's a player I think has limited upside, but I like because he got a good role.
There's a couple of Suns here, and Lek, your thoughts on... I see a lot of, you've got John Noble, you've got Daniel Rioli, Will Powell, to bring back the curtain. He's at 33 as well. So you've sort of, are you thinking it's going to be a bit more mouths to feed back there this year, and no one person really takes the bulk of points?
I think it is a bit more mouths to feed. If Flanders is playing, less behind the ball than he did at stages last year, I'm a big John Noble man. I'm not sure why, but I'm just a big John Noble man.
For the audio listeners, Steve is shaking his head right now, keen to get his thoughts in a second.
I've always loved John Noble. I don't know why. Maybe it's because he looks kind of rattish, but I'm supportive of him. And Daniel Riol, I just think if you go and acquire two guys who play essentially exclusively off the half back, your intention is to play them there. Especially, I know Gold Coast trade with pretend picks and they don't actually value them, so it doesn't matter. But if you're giving away assets to get those guys in, I think there's intent there. Noble, similar to Rivers, is like a D4 guy, D5, but he'll score you 85 points, and he has a cap of above 100, so I've got him in there. And then, yes, Will Powell's a little bit lower, just because I think when I was doing the depth charts, he's just sort of the one that was slightly unlucky with that acquisition lens over the team.
I feel like Will Powell's been a perennial guy in keeper leagues where coaches are just waiting for the role to emerge, and every time it did, he seemingly got injured right as he was about to step into this prime role, and now he's got a couple more people to contend with. Steve, your thoughts on the Suns mix in the defensive line?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to play out. I suspect Will Powell plays more lockdown on the medium-sized forwards. I like Daniel Rioli enough. He's in the 20s for me. He should be fine. I'm obviously not as hot on Noble as Lek. I don't have some affection for him. I have no affection. When the trade went through, I was, why would we do that? But anyway, we press on.
It was a perplexing trade, just for the record, and that's why I think he has to have a role, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense.
Well, these are AFL recruiters that, sometimes don't always do what makes sense. There's a lot of there's a lot of potential in the half-back line for the Suns, and the Suns are actually pretty good at moving the ball, just broke down going forward. So actually, they were strange recruitments to me. I understand Dan Riolo is a quality player, so like that. I can't trust John Noble. I don't know that he's a very efficient player. I don't know that he's better some of these other guys, and I find it hard to rank so many Suns particularly high.
That's fair. I mean, that's all fair, mate. And I guess what I should have probably done is bumped them all lower because I had question marks over all of them. But I think one of them is going to provide that D4, maybe D3 value. I think it's going to be John Noble. Spoiler, you'll work out which person from the Suns backline I got in a mid-season draft in my Dynasty League. But I do think in that Mills is obviously going to get bumped up, but in that Sard has an opportunity just by role. Of course, question marks over his body. I think Rioli and Noble have been brought in to fulfill a role. Carl Ammon's role is always very defined. He just doesn't always deliver the points we want. I think anyone in this sort of tier 8, tier 9 range for me, and maybe I'll concede Callum Mills should be a little higher, it's all a little bit of a crapshoot in there for me.
Any players on the list, Stevie Fizz, in this top 30 absent that you're surprised are missing?
Probably Liam Duggan. I think Duggan should play midfield straight away for West Coast with what's going on there. He'd probably be the standout one, I guess you'd say. I have Loston in, so probably I'm a little bit down on short compared to consensus, and I'm a little bit happier to draft Loston. A lot of the players are very similar, though. Steve May I'll have in there. He's pretty consistent, always has the kick-ins, and can take an intercept for Melbourne. So I like, those two things are pretty good for SuperCoach. Pretty good player. But yeah, probably not wildly different, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, Liam Duggan's probably a good shout. I had him in my top 100 last year, and he just slipped out. And pre-season, if he's in the team, he'll probably push his way in. I think that's a good shout. And Nick Vlastuin had a really underrated last couple of years for SuperCoach. He's a good player, and I think he's the perfect sort of draft if you can get him at, I don't know, D4, D5, whatever it is. He'll serve you well.
Before we wrap things up, and I'll give you a bit of time, I'll pad for you guys because this is a question I've thrown in there at the last minute here. I want your sleeper this season in the defensive line as well. So we'll get to that, and I'll mention my guy. I've just got to mention him on every podcast this preseason, but I'm going with Ari Schoenmaker as my sleeper in drafts. I think he's going to step in and just take a massive role in the defensive line for St Kilda. I think there's room for him there. There's, as much as we've got two of the top 10 defenders according to Lex ranks here playing at St Kilda in Jack Sinclair and Nazaya Wanganeen-Miller, I think there is going to be room for him there. We saw Riley Bonner, for goodness sake, last year playing a defensive key role as a distributor out of the St Kilda backline. Ari Schoenmaker's got a booming kick, a great disposal. I know he's only 19, 20 years old, but this guy's booming left peg is just unbelievable to watch. I think he'll be taking some kick-ins and have a significant role, given especially they've had a couple of early injuries. Dougal Howard's going to be out for a bit. Josh Battle's left the club. I think they've had a couple of other injuries as well. So Ari Schoenmaker for me. Hopefully I've padded long enough for you guys to sort out your sleeper. Lek, you look ready to go. Who have you got for us?
Look, I think, so a guy, we've sort of mentioned him, a guy over 20th, I think Mitch Hinge is really good, and I think he probably gets overlooked in a lot of drafts. I don't know what his ADP is. I think I've got him at 20, and I reckon you can probably get him as, he'll probably be the 30th to 40th defender that goes off in SuperCoach. He still has that tag of injury prone, even though he played a hell of a lot of games last year. Other than that, I said it kind of jokingly, I do think there's a world where your last pick is the rat, Rory Atkins, or you pick him up off the waiver wire and he surprises you for at least a few weeks, because there's a Dan Houston-sized hole down in Port Adelaide and it's got Rory Atkins' name all over it.
Was taking kick-ins at training the other day when I was having a look. I know it's very early. Kane Farrell was not training. I'm growing higher on Kane Farrell the more I look at that Port defensive line, though. It is, there's a big hole there. Steve, before you tell us your sleeper, what are your thoughts on how that shakes out at Port Adelaide? Because, as you said, you've got Dan Houston so high. He was mopping up a lot of points in that defensive line for Port.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think Kane Farrell's the obvious choice. Which is weird because I've sort of suggested he was a good shout all along this preseason. Lek has him higher in his ranks than I do, but I still think it's the right area to be looking. Whether you want to look at Bergman or Farrell or someone else, even that's absolutely a spot where I think drafters should be taking a look late in drafts. If you want to go. I mean, Perryman's probably someone we haven't mentioned who, could absolutely get into that top 30 range. Probably a real sleeper. I know he's starting to get a little bit of heat in the salary cap world is Sam de Koning. If he does assume that ruck role, it should be good point scoring. I don't think you can be confident, but it's the sort of thing you can do late in the drafts where the pick doesn't maybe mean as much if you have to throw the player back into the pool.
Awesome. Thanks, Stevie Fizz. Well, you can check out Lekdog's top 100 ranks and plenty of other great articles to do with SuperCoach and SuperCoach Draft at Code Sports. Stevie Fizz as well, you put together an awesome draft kit every year for drafters. You've got a lot of info in there for SuperCoach drafters as well. Why don't you just walk us through what you've put together this preseason and you've done for the last few years?
Yeah, so the Draft Doctors draft kit, it's on the website if you're interested in that. It's 15 player profiles from each club, draft range, where we think they should be selected, projected averages, the riders' picks, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, and all the ranks, which are getting updated this Friday, the 14th, is it? 14th. So, yeah, we update the ranks a few times each year, and, yeah, it's a bit of fun as well, so... Not all heavy
Busy
reading.
Valentine's Day for you there, Steve. It's good to know. Yeah. Mrs. Fizz will be happy with that one, but no, fantastic. Thanks for joining us. We'll be going through our forward rankings next. Thanks again, Lekdog and Stevie Fizz from the Draft Doctors. We'll see you again soon.